Hey everybody, welcome back. My name is Mr. Califer. I'm here with Mississippi Public Broadcasting, and I've got another great lesson for y'all today. So thanks for making it, and we'll go ahead and hop in. So today we're talking about cells. Specifically, we're going to talk about something known as the cell theory, which I introduced to y'all last time. I really wanted to draw y'all's attention to this guy in the bottom corner here, okay? His name is Robert Hooke, and he was the very first person to see cells. What he did is he took cork, which is a type of tree. You've probably seen it before. It's on coasters. Sometimes it's in the top of certain bottles, okay? So he took cork, he cut it up really thin, and he put it under a microscope. And this is what he saw. Let me zoom in on that picture a little bit, okay? You can see that it's a bunch of these little squares. Well, it reminded Robert Hooke of the cells in a monastery or little rooms in a house. And so that's actually where the word cells come from, is that this cork kind of looked like it had a lot of little rooms in it. So what I want y'all to remember, Robert Hooke took a look, okay? What did he see? He saw cells. Hooke took a look. Try to remember that, and that'll help you remember who the first person to ever see cells was. Someone else that's really important when it came to developing the cell theory is a Danish glassmaker. His name was Anton van Leeuwenhoek, and he was able to make these really precise lenses. Lenses are things that go inside of glasses, but also inside of a microscope. And so he made this really advanced microscope compared to anything that was around. And what he did is he took these little drops of water, he put it on a slide, and he looked at the water with his microscope. And this is what he saw. Anton van Leeuwenhoek is known as the father of microbiology. When he took that water and looked at it under a microscope, he kind of opened up this whole new world that we had never seen before. We saw these microscopic animals in the water, moving around, living their life that we just didn't know about. And so to honor him, we call Anton van Leeuwenhoek the father of microbiology, which is like studying really small things. Okay, I've got a couple more scientists I want to introduce y'all to, okay? So we've got these two scientists at the top that I want to talk about. Here's their pictures. So we have Theodore Schwann. Schwann was a zoologist, and what that means is that he was studying animals, and he would take animal tissue and observe it under the microscope. Just like Hooke saw cells, Theodore Schwann also saw cells, and he discovered that all animals are made up of cells. Someone kind of working in the same realm was this other guy. His name is Matthias Schleiden, okay? He was a botanist, so instead of studying animals, he was studying plants. And he did the same thing as Schwann. He took some plant tissues, put them under a microscope and observed them, and he figured out that all plants are made out of cells as well. So to me, these guys' names kind of sound alike. They both start with the letter S. We've got Schwann and Schleiden, but to me, there's a really easy way to remember which one was which. Let's look at Theodore Schwann's name. Does his last name kind of remind you of an animal you've heard of before? To me, Schwann sounds a lot like swan, and that helps me remember that he was the one that was studying animals, and the other S guy, Schleiden, he was studying plants, okay? So that's a little mnemonic device to use to remember which one was which. Okay, I've got another scientist I want to talk to you all about. I don't have his picture up here, but his name was Rudolf Virchow. And what he discovered, he had this really famous line. And the line goes that all cells come from pre-existing cells. And that's the last part of the cell theory. We know that cells are the basic unit of life. We know that all organisms are made up of cells. And he kind of gave us that last bit that all cells come from pre-existing cells. Okay, so let's take another look at the cell theory real quick. Here's those 3 points written down, and make sure you're getting these in your notes for me, okay? These are really important. So the cell theory states that every organism is made up of one or more cells. Does anyone remember from our last unit what an organism that is only made up of one cell is called? You might remember that it's called a unicellular organism, right? Uni means one. So think of like a unicycle has one wheel, a unicorn has one horn. Even the word unite means to bring together, bring is one. And so that prefix uni means one. A unicellular organism is an organism that is only one cell large. Okay, the second part of the cell theory is that the cell is the basic unit of life. Okay, when it comes to if something is alive or not, you can't get any smaller than a cell. Okay, And then the last part, this is what Virchow told us, all cells arise from pre-existing cells. Okay, so that's the cell theory for you. These are really important. It was a bunch of scientists working together over hundreds of years to discover this, okay? So let's keep it going. I've got a couple of review questions I wanted to ask y'all, okay? So we're going to kind of treat this like a game show. What I'm going to do, I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to yell out the answer as loud as you can, okay? Make sure you're doing it quickly, and that way all of your classmates in the room with you are going to know how smart you are, okay? So here's our first question. Hooke. Hooke took a what? Hooke took a look. That's right. And what did he see? He saw cells. That's right. Hooke took a look and he saw cells. Okay, so what was the contribution of this next scientist? He discovered that what type of organism are made out of cells? Schwann discovered that all animals are made out of cells. That's right. Okay, what about our next scientist? He discovered that all of what type of organism are made out of cells? Schleiden. He discovered that all plants are made out of cells. That's right. Okay, Virchow had a really famous line. What was his line? What was his quote? All cells come from pre-existing what? Virchow told us that all cells come from pre-existing cells. So those 4 or 5 scientists all working together kind of developed that cell theory for us, okay? Let's talk about the cell theory a little bit more. I have a question. It's got a blank in it, and I'd like you to try to fill in the blank again, okay? And just feel free to yell it out, and that way everyone's going to know that you know the answer. So this one says, all living things are made of cells. That's right. Okay, here's another one for you. Cells are the basic unit of what? They're the basic unit of life. That's right. Okay, and then the last one, cells come from what? Pre-existing cells. That means that cells can't just come out of nowhere. They have to come from a cell that's already been there. Okay, so we've got our scientists and the cell theory kind of all there in one place. Make sure you're writing those in your notes for me. All right, let's keep it going. All right, y'all, so I just talked about the cell theory and the scientists that help us discover it. We're going to talk about something a little different now. These are cell organelles. And just like the board tells us here, cell organelles are little organs. Just like the organs inside of your body each have a specific job to do, organelles inside of a cell each have a specialized role. Some of them might take care of digesting nutrients, some of them might control the cell, some of them are responsible for moving the cell around. So just like organs in our bodies have specific jobs to play, cell organelles have the same thing to do, okay? So all of these are organelles. You can see these little structures here, the pink and the purple and the oranges. Those are all organelles, okay? Now cells aren't hollow outside of the organelles. They're filled with a jelly fluid-like substance called cytoplasm. So the whole thing is filled up with cytoplasm, okay? And I'm going to talk about a few different organelles that all cells have in their, inside of them, okay? So let's go ahead and hop into that. So these are cell features. These are every cell. There's a lot of different types of cell in your body, but there's a lot of different types of cells that make up different organisms. Regardless of what type of cell it is, these are a couple of things that all cells have in common. I'm going to introduce them now and get into a little bit more detail on the next couple of slides. So the first thing that all cells have are these little organelles called ribosomes. What are ribosomes? Well, they make proteins. Okay, proteins are very, very important. The majority of your body is made out of protein, and ribosomes are the organelles that make proteins for the cell. Okay, all cells have ribosomes. Something else that all cells have is that cytoplasm. We don't want the cell to, imagine a balloon that you let all the air out of. It would kind of deflate. We don't want that to happen to your cells. We want to keep them inflated, so we fill them up with this jelly-like fluid substance, and it's called cytoplasm, okay? Another thing that all cells have in common is DNA. What is DNA? It's the genetic material. This basically tells your cells what to do, and we'll talk about DNA in a lot more detail later on, okay? Something else that all cells have in common is a cytoskeleton. Just like the skeleton in your body kind of holds your body up and gives it its shape and its form, the shape and form of a cell is determined by the cytoskeleton. It kind of works like the muscles and skeleton of your body, okay? And then the last thing that all cells have in common is something called a cell membrane. A cell membrane is the outer boundary of the cell. You can almost think of it like the outline. And it lets some things into the cell, but not everything. And we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail as we go. So these are 5 characteristics. It doesn't matter what type of cell you're looking at. If it's a cell, it's got these 5 things, okay? Let's get into a little bit more detail on what these different features do for the cell. So the first one I wanted to talk about is a ribosome, okay? One thing I like to tell students, it's got the word some in it there at the end, S-O-M-E. Its job is that it makes something. What is it making? It's making proteins. Proteins are what your body is made out of, so they're very, very important. Ribosomes is the site of protein synthesis, which means it's making proteins, okay? You can find these ribosomes in 2 places inside of the cell. You'll either find them free floating, which means they're not attached to anything, they're very small, sometimes they'll just be floating in the cytosol. Other times you'll find them attached to a different organelle called the endoplasmic reticulum, which we just abbreviate it a lot as ER. So ribosomes can be free floating or they can be attached to the rough endoplasmic reticulum. Okay? The last thing that the ribosome is in charge of, they're actually made in a part of the nucleus called the nucleolus, and we'll get into that a little later on too. Okay? So that's ribosomes. Let's keep it going. I wanted to talk about this cytoplasm in more detail. So cytoplasm is a gelatinous liquid inside of the cell. It keeps the cell inflated, okay? We don't want it to deflate like a balloon. So we fill it up with this fluid. It's kind of like think of it like Jell-O almost. It's called cytoplasm. That's what it's filled up with. It's mostly made up of water and salts, and it is, what keeps the cell kind of filled up, okay? Okay, talking about the cytoskeleton in a little bit more detail, the cytoskeleton kind of acts like the skeleton and muscle of the cell. It's going to provide the shape and structure of the cell, so whatever the cell looks like, it looks like that because of the cytoskeleton that is there. It also helps move the organelles around, and it's made up of a few different types of filaments. It can be made up of microtubules or actin filaments, as well as intermediate filaments. Okay, so this skeleton gives the cell its shape and its structure, and it helps it move around a little bit. Okay, and then what is DNA? Well, DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. Okay, it's the code of life. It's basically how your cells know what to do. But it's also why you kind of look like your parents. You get half of your DNA from your mom and half of your DNA from your dad, and it comes together to make your DNA. That's why you kind of look like your parents, is because you share a lot of your DNA with them. And the DNA is instructing your cell on what to do. And we find DNA in every cell in our bodies, but we also find it in every cell there is. Every cell has DNA. Okay, let's talk about that cell membrane in a little bit more detail. The cell membrane is the boundary of the cell. So this is where the cell ends. And it's made up of a special type of fat called a phospholipid. You can see here that it's made up of a phospholipid bilayer. Well, what's going on here is if you look really closely at that picture, you'll actually see 2 layers. You'll see one row of those little yellow circles and then another row of those little yellow circles. So that's 2 layers of a fat, and the fat is called phospholipid. You've probably seen this prefix bi before, so think of like a bicycle has 2 wheels. So the same way that a bicycle has 2 wheels, your cell membrane has 2 layers of a phospholipid. And we'll talk about these lipids in a little bit more detail as we move forward, okay? Hey y'all, thanks so much for making it here today. I had a great time explaining biology with y'all. Your teacher has some other assignments for you all to work on today, so make sure you give it your best effort, and I hope you have a wonderful day.